Hello and welcome to today's conversation as part of the Atlantic Council Geoeconomics Center's IMF Week, live here from our pop-up studio inside the IMF, where we dedicate a whole week in over 50 different conversations to in-depth interviews and the events with global financial leaders here as part of the IMF World Bank annual meetings to discuss the economic issues and the global economic outlook. My name is Jörn Fleck. I'm the Senior Director of the Europe Center at the Atlantic Council. And we're in partnership with the Geoeconomics Center hosting this conversation. And it is my pleasure to welcome today the European Commissioner for International Partnerships, Jutta Urpilainen. A warm welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Commissioner Urpilainen, of course, you come to your current EU post with significant experience in the development field as a former Finnish Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister. We've been directly engaged here at the IMF. You were a long-time Finnish Member of Parliament, an NGO leader. And so in your current role, you lead the European Union's portfolio on international cooperation and sustainable development, and we will have hopefully a conversation also about this 5-year term that's coming to an end, where you've overseen, you've worked that tough field against the backdrop of dramatic changes in the geopolitical backdrop, in the global economy, and in the development landscape, and we want to explore that, obviously against the background of the COVID-19 pandemic, Russia's full-scale invasion and ongoing war in Ukraine, a new conflict in the Middle East, and then generally a geopolitical climate that is characterized by increasing confrontation and competition. And all of these have obviously impacted your field, your portfolio dramatically. And so today we want to look both at the annual meetings and the agenda here, the here and now, but also then take a step back and look at the last 5 years and get your perspective and assessment. And so with that, let's dive right in. Let's start with this week's agenda and the here and now. Coming into these meetings, what have been the European Commission's, what have been your priorities for this week, and what's your assessment of your meetings and the annual meeting generally thus far?
Well, I have to tell you that I came here directly from the G7 Development Ministers meeting, which took place in Italy. And in that meeting, we were very much focusing on investments. And I would say that we talk about this post-ODA era, how to use public resources in order to leverage more and more also private investments, especially for the global south. So from that perspective, when I arrived Washington, D.C., I think there are a couple of issues which are especially close to my heart. And the first one is, of course, this MDP reform. I still remember 2 years ago when we started that discussion that how to reform multilateral development banks, how to make them work more efficient, and how to also accelerate green transition also in the lower and middle income countries. And I think really the progress has been made if you look at the World Bank Group, and I have to, of course, congratulate Ajay Banga, who is speaking on the screen while we are talking here. So I think he has done, and his team, an excellent job. But then the other point is, of course, this IDA 21 or 21st replenishment, and how to ensure that enough money will be also dedicated for the least developed countries, and how to eradicate poverty at the time where I would say the main discourse in many parts of the world is about military capabilities, investing in hard security, strengthening, the resilience in terms of military conflicts. So I think it's important to also put to the political agenda Sustainable Development Goals and poverty and hunger eradication and I would say these kind of core development issues.
So I want to come back to a number of points you already made, but maybe sticking with the annual meetings right now and what you already mentioned, this geopolitical backdrop that we discussed has driven, in some ways, a renewed vigor or renewed effort to engage with low-income countries, developing countries. We've seen, as you mentioned, the replenishment of IDA or some commitments made this week. What do you hope will be the positive takeaways and the major achievements in that and beyond that, also in terms of reform, MDB reform that you already mentioned from this week?
Well, I think, when it comes to the World Bank Group and when it comes to the Developing Committee meeting, which is taking place in the afternoon, and I have another also to speak there, I think now we have a new playbook. So it's important to implement that in order to have a not only bigger bank, but also better bank. And I think one thing I would like to highlight, and I will definitely raise that also in my speech, is that we should get out of these silos, because now we have so many different development actors. The European Union is still one of the biggest ODA provider in the world. But I mean, how to coordinate and collaborate more, how to exchange ideas, information, and be more transparent in order to also get better results and in order to leverage. And I think this is something we need to, and I hope that will be on the agenda here in the annual meetings. And then, of course, the other issue which is close to my heart, and I hope that will be, and I noticed that has been in the agenda, is that, yes, we have conflicts in different parts of the world, including in our own continent in Europe. By the way, I never thought that I would see a war in Europe in my lifetime again. And that was a horrible shock to all of us. But at the same time, I mean, we also have another kind of security threats which we are facing. And I would say that, of course, the climate change is the most existential security threat all of us are facing. But in addition to that, let's say terrorism, let's say pandemics, we have Mbox, which is taking place currently in several African countries. And all these security threats demand international cooperation and international partnerships in order to be able to address them. And that's why I think these platforms like the annual meetings these are so important, because we need to be able to come together and hopefully also agree on a pathway and roadmap how we are able to tackle these new kind of security challenges.
Do you see a groundswell and a consensus emerging and the actual follow-up? Right?
I have to say that when I was here last time in Washington, D.C., and I attended spring meetings, and I attended also the Developing Committee of the World Bank, it was really positive experience. And I think at the first time I had that kind of feeling that now, despite some irritancies when it comes to geopolitics or when it comes to Middle East or Ukraine, these different actors around the same table can agree on something. And for me, it was a kind of silver line in a way, and sign of optimism that despite these challenges we are facing in terms of security, we can still agree on the reform of the multilateral development banks and the World Bank, which is, from my perspective, very necessary and important objective.
Switching from the immediate here and now a little bit, as I mentioned in my intro, the world has changed dramatically since you took up your post in 2019. You're now almost at the end of your 5-year term. I mentioned all of the challenges, but how have those changed your priorities and the Commission's priorities when it comes to sustainable development? You mentioned a new playbook for your own work. How have you had to adjust your playbook according to these, or in response to those challenges, and what do you look back on as major achievements that you've been driving in your portfolio for sustainable development at the Commission?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think maybe three takeaways. First of all, in the middle of the COVID, we decided to create this Team Europe concept because we were in a situation where we had to mobilize more resources, and the only way to do that was work more closely with our 27 member states, also with our DFIs, and in order to succeed, we created this concept of Team Europe. And now that's the permanent working method of the European Union. So in order to better partner to our partners, especially in the Global South, we now collaborate more, we coordinate our efforts, we set common objectives, and we even pool resources. So I would say that that is definitely one of my legacies, and I'm very proud of that. And hopefully, of course, we can get a bit more visibility also for our actions on the ground, because the fact is that, as I said, that we are still the biggest ODA provider in the world, if I look at the Team Europe, so 27 member states and the Commission and our DFIs. In addition to that, I am very proud of this paradigm shift. Our partners in the Global South, they don't want to be subject of aid. They want to be actors themselves. They want to stand by their own feet and take decisions. And that's why it was so important to change the paradigm, get rid of from this donor-recipient kind of relationship where we go and we say that, okay, this is what you have to do, we impose you some, and in order to get our funding. So we really wanted to create equal, mutually beneficial partnership in order to strengthen the resilience of Europe, but also the resilience of our partners. And I think the example of that new paradigm is indeed the Global Gateway investment strategy. Our commitment to mobilize investments up to 300 billion euro by 2027, investments in energy, investments in digital as well as transport sectors, but not only in hard infrastructure, also in education, research and health. And if I look at the results, so between 2021 and 2023, we have so far mobilized 179 billion euro worth of investments. So, so the idea is that we use ODA money, but we use in a way through which we can leverage also private investments. We need private resources in order to achieve sustainable development goals. And then the third, I would say, takeaway is that we have the biggest youth generation in history, 1.8 billion young citizens. And if we look at where those young people are living, most of them live actually in Africa. I just visited last week in Senegal. 75% of the citizens in Senegal are below 30 years old. They have less than 20 million citizens at the moment, but by 2050 there will be 40 million citizens. So we have to invest in youth, and we have to empower and engage young people. And this has been my personal priority as a commissioner, and I think the young people should be at the core of the development policy.
If I can dive into those three big items a little bit. On the Global Gateway, obviously also a reaction to geopolitical competition, to China's Belt and Road Initiative in many ways. Can you speak a little bit more about the mobilization of those 300 billion, the impact that has made, and the focus? The choice you already mentioned, a major reason, but the focus on Africa in the Global Gateway.
Well, I think the reasons behind the Global Gateway, there are several of them, but one of course is the fact that there's a huge gap of investments. I mean, if we want to achieve sustainable development goals, we should invest $4 trillion more every year. And we know that, unfortunately, we don't have public resources, at least now, in order to do that. So we need to be able to leverage also private investments. On the other hand, as you said, we are living in the geopolitical competition, and we don't only, face battle of narratives, which we also face, but in addition to that, we also face very much battle of offers. So different actors are offering different kind of partnership for our partners in the global south. And that's why we felt that, first of all, we have an obligation to try to meet that gap of investments. But at the same time, we need to have an offer. We need to have our own European offer to our partner countries. And that's why we created this Global Gateway investment strategy. For us, it's very important to respect very high quality standards in terms of environment and also social standards. We use public resources, so we give grant funding, but we also use blending. We give guarantees from the European Union budget for the European Investment Bank or the National Development Bank, so that then, they can mobilize private investment. So I would say that the results are very positive. There is a huge appetite for this in our partner countries. And especially the idea that we don't want to create new dependencies. Instead, we really want to strengthen the resilience of our partner countries. How? I give you one example. For instance, in the beginning of the COVID, we realized that Africa imports 99% of the vaccines it uses. It produces only 1% of the vaccines it uses. So we created a big global gateway flagship. We mobilized over 1 billion euro for that. We work with our member states, but also their private companies with European Investment Bank in order to start vaccine production in several African countries, so that Africa could produce vaccines in Africa for Africa. And it was really a bit moving moment for me to visit last week Senegal and visit this Madiba project, where I was able to see the factory, the facilities, the premises of the new factory, and see that actually this dream is coming through, that Africa is capable to produce its own vaccines. Of course, it will take time, and it has been a sort of 360 degrees approach. So it's not only the investment in factory itself, but it's also very much supporting Senegal to improve its business environment, regulatory framework. We are very much investing in capacity building, technical assistance, training workforce, nurses and doctors and researchers and so forth. So it's a very holistic approach, but the main objective is really to support the resilience of Africa, and this is of course something which they really respect and appreciate.
So moving from these great achievements to, you already mentioned the need to leverage private investment also as part of the Global Gateway to a greater degree. Where do you think you've made the most progress in that, in bringing in more private investment in that sense, and where do you see the biggest challenges for your efforts at the Commission still in this respect?
Well, I see a lot of appetite among the European companies to invest more in emerging markets, in Africa, but also in Latin America, the Caribbean, as well as Asia and the Pacific. But of course, I would say that we still need to encourage them not only to take that financial risk, but also take that political risk. Because when you are investing and you are going to the new markets, it's always very big decisions, especially for the companies. And that's why I think this kind of a Team Europe approach, where we can de-risk through the guarantees, for instance, and we can, lower also the political risk by offering them a dialogue with the political decision makers. I think it's something which it is very valuable for them, and of course we hope that we would see more and more European companies to be present in several partner countries. One sector where I see a lot of opportunities, of course, is energy. If I look at Africa, for instance, half of the citizens still lack access to electricity. It's quite amazing taking into account what are the renewable resources in that continent in terms of solar, but also wind. So I think that there is a lot of potential to even leverage much more. And as I said, progress has been made. 179 billion euro worth of investments have been mobilized so far, but of course we still have a lot of work ahead of us.
We've talked a lot about you adjusting and working through a really challenging environment in your 5-year term, and the achievements and the progress that you've helped to drive forward. When you look back at those 5 years, you've spoken about the achievements and the progress. Where would you, in hindsight, wish you had made more progress? What has been left on the table? What do you see as things that you would change in hindsight from your 5-year term?
Well, I think there are a couple of issues. First of all, we have really tried to strengthen the multilateral rule-based order. We have tried to strengthen our cooperation with the United Nations, but also with the World Bank. We have now created this trilateral cooperation of 3 different institutions, so the World Bank as well as IMF, the United Nations, but also with the IMF we have had strategic dialogues, and I have met Kristalina Georgieva regularly. But still, my very honest feeling is that we work too much in silos as an international community. I think we very much share the common objectives when it comes to sustainable development goals. We understand the needs, but still each and every organization is very much focusing themselves. So I think this is something I hope that would be a priority for the next Commission, that how can we bring more and more world together, as we did this with this Team Europe approach. Maybe we need also this kind of Team World approach, where the international community could work more closely together in order to also leverage and get better results. Then the second, I would say, issue is that I think it's a pity that when the COVID-19 hit, we understood how fragile still the health systems are in many of our partner countries. And that was actually the reason why we couldn't vaccinate people in the beginning. Even though we were able to donate those vaccines, people were not able to be vaccinated. And I fear a bit now that although we all know that what are the lessons learned from the past and from the COVID-19 pandemic, we tend to forget. And that's why I think it's so important that despite all the needs, and I know that there are huge needs for investments in terms of security and competitiveness and many other policy sectors, we should somehow ensure that COVID-19 won't happen again. And that means that we have to also invest in public services, we have to invest in public health, because the COVID-19 really showed us how interconnected we are. So intertwined, what is happening in Asia impacts immediately to the rest of the world. And I think we have to prevent that kind of tragedy to take place.
Well, thank you for that very clear-eyed assessment, but also the ambition, right? That's, I think, stands out. And that's a good segue to maybe looking a little bit at the future of EU leadership in sustainable development and this whole field. You already mentioned there are all these competing priorities, a war going on in Europe, hard security, Europe having to step up investments into its own security, competitiveness, long-term agendas for that at the top of the European agenda. You also have economic challenges within the European Union, especially when it comes to the big economies, France, Germany, and others. And you have a rise of populism that doesn't look so keenly on a development agenda in general. We also have the next multi-annual financial framework, the 7-year budget for the European Union. The negotiations start next year. Are you concerned at all when you look ahead at the financial underpinnings, the commitment in Europe to this leadership position that you have helped build up with Team Europe, Global Gateway, and the combined effort that we've seen over the last 5 years and beyond that?
Well, I think it's very clear that there are a couple of priorities for the next Commission, and the Commission President von der Leyen has described them very well in her political guidance. So the first one is, of course, security. Our security environment has changed, unfortunately, because of Russia's attack against Ukraine. So Europe needs to invest more in its hard security, in its defense, military capabilities, but also defense industries. But in addition to that, then the other priority is competitiveness. We have to be more competitive. We have to invest more in several policy sectors, and the key question is that how are we able to do that, taking into account the budget constraints as you described very well, and also the low growth rate. And then, of course, the question is that how to ensure that despite these very clear two political priorities, we understand that we are living in the very interconnected and intertwined world. So that at the same time, while we are investing in our hard security, we also have to invest in our other security threats in order to be able to address them. And that means that we have to also invest in our international cooperation and international partnerships. Because although Europe would be carbon neutral continent by 2030, we can not stop the climate change and climate warming. So we need our partners to be on board. And for that, of course, we need also international cooperation. But it will be very challenging exercise to prepare the next proposal for the MFF. But I have my trust on Commission President von der Leyen, and also in the EU, in that they really want to have this balanced approach, and they also understand that this is the interest of the European Union. Not only, turn inwards and look their current interest, but look a bit further away, two steps further, and understand that, what is happening in Africa, which is our sister continent, has a clear and direct impact also to the future of Europe. And when it comes to migration, for instance, we need legal migration to Europe in order to ensure the economic growth in the future. And that's why I think this kind of a balanced approach in many terms, it's something I hope, and I'm convinced that will be on the agenda and at the core of the MFF.
A lightning round question and answer to wrap us up. In the United States, there's a tradition that the outgoing president leaves a note for the incoming president, sharing some wisdom. When you leave office, what would be in your note to your, I believe, Czech successor?
That's a very good question. Actually, I might need to write that kind of note. That's a good advice. I think it's important to maintain the hope. What this world is lacking, it's hope. I think if you talk to the people all over the world, I have traveled several different countries, but also in Europe, I mean, people are losing their hope for the future. And I think that's the role of us political decision makers, be it in Europe or in the US or across the world, to provide hope to the citizens. And I think that would be my main message.
That's a good message to end on. Commissioner Urpilainen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Please do check out a lot of content on the Atlantic Council's website on the IMF week here at the Council. With that, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Commissioner, and see you very soon.